Hello and welcome to Glasgow Rangers Nation with me, your host Owen, bringing you news of Michael Beale's press conference pre-Motherwell. Now, one of the things you'll discover from when you hear me go through what Michael Beale talked about his press conference today was there was very little mention of Motherwell. It was more to do with all the other things going on around the club about contracts, about Alfredo Morelos, about Malik Tillman. Very little to do with the actual game itself. It was more, I think, topics and conversations that have been had amongst Rangers fans rather than, actual game preparation talk. Sometimes you feel as well that, Michael Beale is very open and honest with the media and talks very, freely about what he's thinking and about where he's at with certain players and certain situations. And, maybe he could, take a leaf out of a few other, top coaches' books and say a little bit less, maybe. Less is more, Michael. Less is more, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for your phenomenal support over the last few days. We've really up in terms of subs. We're on 291 now, smashed through the 200 mark. We're aiming obviously to hit 300 sooner rather than later as we continue to build a Glasgow Rangers nation. Also look out for a couple of live podcasts we've got coming up. We've got a live pod tomorrow night here on Glasgow Rangers Nation, so please come and join me for that, as well as a live podcast on Sunday with Victoria Searle, who is a model and who is a content creator, a social media personality, Swarovski. There's a lot of work as well. I'm a massive Rangers fan, so please come and join me for that podcast. Anyway, let's talk Rangers. Let's talk what Michael Beale's had to say, and let's talk about his press conference then, shall we? Obviously, the first topic that came up was the semi-final draw against that lot from over the city, the dirty, unwashed scumbags that we have to play a number of times each season. I've seen us mention as well that in these remaining two Old Firm league games, away fans will not be allowed to attend Parkhead and Ibrox due to the amount of trouble that has been in recent weeks, recent games, sorry, not recent weeks. Michael Beale obviously said, there's 3 to go against Celtic, 3 out of possible 11, 12 games that we have left. So obviously, a good number of games against Celtic, and that we go and we seek to prove ourselves, and that the Celtic games, the 3 games, are equally as important as the other 9 to 10 games that we've got to play. And he said that yes, it is a big game, but obviously there are a lot of pivotal big games coming up. And he talked about the fact that obviously their form in the league has been fantastic since he's come to the club, obviously unbeaten in the league, and their away form in particular has been very, very good. He talked about the fact that there's a lot of games before the Celtic game, before the Old Firm League game at Parkhead, and as well as obviously the semi-final at the end of April, which was confirmed as obviously the 30th of April today. Obviously, the second semi-final playing at Hampden Park. We may well be playing on a mudslide. Anyway, he said it's not about the game. It's much more about how we arrive into that game, into what form we are in, how we are playing, in terms of how the players' fitness is. Obviously, given the games we've got coming up against the likes of Motherwell and Dundee United. And, he kind of said that those games are equally important, and having positive results and getting positive results in those games are just as important as the Old Firm. He said the form in the league has been fantastic, like I said, particularly away from home. And, he said that he hopes their confidence will continue on throughout the rest of this season. He was asked about the fact that, how can they reproduce that away form at home, produce very similar performances away from at home as they do away from home. He said, obviously, away from home, there was a lot of clean sheets, which he felt were very important, and the defense have been very strong in a number of games, which they have certainly. The defense have played well. They've kept clean sheets at places like Tynecastle. Yes, we did concede a dodgy goal against Hibs, but other than that, we tied them down in terms of chances. He also talked about the fact that, in particular, again, the Hibs and the Hearts games, there'd been a lot of free-flowing football away from home. I suppose the pressure is off, isn't it? When you play away from home, there is less pressure than when you play at home, particularly at Ibrox, obviously, where there is a great deal of pressure on the players to produce. He talked about the fact there was obviously counter-attacking football as well. In terms of obviously the game at Tynecastle and obviously the game at Easter Road too. He said about replicating that form. He said obviously that it was very much down to the fact that the media breaking down that low block, and Beale said that the fact that he said that it doesn't really change that much. And the fact that, that in those games they've had a great deal of chances and a great deal of opportunities. He said obviously in the most recent game against Wraith, they had 24 shots and 18 corners. In the game against Hibs, they had 30 shots. He said it's a bit more about them being more clinical in front of goal and having a bit more quality in that final third to take an opportunity when it presents itself. That is what he needs to see from this team going forward. All those shots and all those attempts on goal, but only a limited number of goals, and something Beale certainly wants to see rectified as the season progresses. Then obviously the topic that is on everyone's lips was the Alfredo Morelos news. So he was asked about Morelos on a number of occasions by a number of media personalities. He said, first of all, there was no truth in the Sevilla rumours. That's what he said after he had talked to Alfie this week. And he said that him and Alfie continued to have a strong relationship and were committed to each other, a bit like an old married couple there with what he had to say. He said that, the focus between him and Alfie was very much about taking each game as it comes now between now and the end of the season, playing to the best of their abilities and getting the best out of Alfie. And then they would sit down at the end of the season and have a chat about any new contract. It does seem to be a bit of a change of tune by Michael Beale. There's certainly a lot of criticism of it seemed of Alfie, in that post-match interview after the Wraith game, where he talked about the fact that, he wanted to see more from Alfie. There certainly was no negativity towards Alfredo Morelos at all in these comments that he made in his media availability today. He was then asked about the fact that, he talked about Ryan Jack being a player he'd like to work with. He was asked about how he'd been very positive about Ryan Kent. He said, can you sort of see Alfredo Morelos in that same terms as, wanting him to stay? And he said, yes, I can, which is the first time we've really heard Michael Beale talk about Alfredo Morelos and him and, Beale wanting to keep him at the club. He says it's about the future. He says it's about building, a lot of players that, are out of contract. He says, there's a lot of judgments to make as regards this. He said, obviously the fact that with all these players out of contract, if they choose not to go down the route of renewing these players, it would, of course, free up a lot of capital, a lot of money to be able to go and spend on new players. And that was something that he was going to have to think about. And the board were going to have to think about going forward. That's a sort of as committal as he was on that. And he's right when he comes out with those comments. There are players that, that we could afford to move on from. There are certain players that, spend a lot of time injured that we could move on from, the likes of, Philip Helander, for example, or even to some extent John Lundstrom as well, to free up a little bit of capital and also bring a bit of money into the club. He said, that he identified players, a few players, to Ross Wilson and the board, and he talked about the fact that, that those players were players that he'd hoped that Rangers could sign. He said they were doing diligence on them and looking to, scouting them. He's still very much a twofold job at the moment, continuing with the present team, also developing a team for the future in the go of July for Rangers. But, the whole Alfie business was something that obviously, took up a large part of the press conference and conversations around Alfredo Morelos. He was also asked about the fact that, what happened at the end of the season. He said, well, obviously, again, as he said previously, he would sit down with Alfie and discuss it. He was asked about Alfie's fitness. He said there was no difference between him and Cholak. And, Alfie's work ethic was there. That Alfie had a 105 assists, and if you sort of rein back Alfie's contributions just to games that he played in, that he would probably have a 1-to-1 in terms of goals. He said it didn't just apply to Alfie. He said obviously there were a number of players who were in contract. He was obviously talking about their futures as well, and options that Rangers could sell those players on. That was certainly something that he talked about. He was then actually asked about Malik Tillman and where we got to as regards Malik Tillman and his Beale commented that had and he was for the Motherwell game, which was excellent news, obviously, to finally have Malik Tillman back in the fold and finally have Malik Tillman ready to go again. You know, the fact that he's obviously missed a number of games, and it's good news to have Malik back. He also talked about Borna Barisic. He said obviously his wife was a couple of days late, and then obviously Borna had international duty. He said that Ridvan was fit and ready to go, as was Adam Devine as well. And it was at this point he kind of slipped in a remark that kind of went a little bit under the radar and talked about the fact that they may even see a change of formation to possibly going 3 at the back with John Souttar now back from injury. You know, something perhaps along the lines of this. You know, with McGregor goal, a back 3 of Souttar, Goldson, and Davis, a midfield 4 of Tav, Raskin, Cantwell, Barisic, or Ridvan, depending on who's available. Tillman in behind Fashion Jr. and Cholak. You know, we may see that, you know, in these games against Motherwell and Dundee United, where we can afford to perhaps experiment, him trying that 3 at the back formation. Again, that was something that was only kind of half muted and not really picked up on by the press who were there. It's not easy to say. Signing from Bournemouth, who has missed a number, obviously, of games and training sessions due to his heart condition. He said that he'd had 2 operations, that it was a very personal matter for Namdi, and that he had obviously been seeking the advice of cardiologists and seeking the advice of 3 cardiologists and some of the best cardiologists in the business. He said obviously that Namdi was only allowed to train lightly, the sort of training that you or I could do. You know, he'd not spoken to him about those Instagram posts, you know, that appeared to criticize the club, whether they're criticism of the club or the medical treatment that he'd had. Who knows? You know, those Instagram posts were deleted. And, you know, he was talking about the fact that he had not had the opportunity to speak to Namdi yet about those posts and the direction those posts were heading on. He was asked as well about the Scott Arfield contract. There's been a lot of rumours in the media that Arfield is getting a new 1-year contract. Beale certainly brushed that off and said that was not the case, and no one had started negotiations over a new deal. The final question he was asked was obviously about the 5th tier, the chance to bring in a 5th tier in Scottish football, where B teams from South Rangers are allowed to play. His personal opinion only. His personal opinion would be that it would be good Scottish talent, and there was a huge gap between, you know, the under-21s and the reserves, and obviously playing at this level. And the fact that, you know, that so many other nations in Europe did it, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Germany. You know, maybe this was a good thing, and that Scotland should follow that example. And you know, in the effort of producing excellent team players for the national team and helping teams to develop their own young players. But certainly, you know, a big change on the whole Alfredo Morelos, a much more positive outlook towards Morelos and the future than perhaps his time at Rangers isn't done, given what Beale has had to say today. Like I said, a lot more positive on that front. Anyway, Rangers fans, let me know in the comments below what you think of what Michael Beale's had to say in his press conference today, and what's the future hold for Alfie? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching Glasgow Rangers Nation. Please continue to watch. Please continue to hit that sub, ring that notification bell, just give this video a like, guys. It really does help. Guys, no surrender.